I'm your host, DJ Angelfire, with my co-host, Noah, aka 51st Citizen, and today we have guest on Instagram artist, makes art pieces out of clothing, Xalamander. Would you like to tell us what you're doing on Insta, how you got started, and all that jazz?
Sure. Okay, so I started making clothes. I was just using my mom's sewing machine in February, and I had some ideas for clothes that I wanted to wear because I'm really picky, and so I started making those, and just ideas kept coming, and so eventually I started Xalamander, um, which is kind of like a play on my middle name, which is Alexander, and then Salamander, it's like a cool creature I kind of resonate with. I just like them. I'm just kind of pushing myself to do untraditional stuff and really take advantage of the fact that I'm doing it by hand, because in a lot of ways that could be a disadvantage. But basically, just trying to do stuff that factories maybe couldn't do.
From what I've seen, a lot of the pieces that you've made, they they're kind of a collage in an interesting way that I don't think you normally see in fashion, if you would call it fashion,
Yeah,
if you
for
would say
sure.
it falls under that category. I don't know. I feel like that's kind of a new thing to have just that sort of not just because people would make quilts and that sort of thing out of different fabrics back in the day, but they would
Right.
always sort of be symmetrical, that kind of thing. But the
Yeah.
things you do, even though they do come together into a full, good-looking product in the end, a lot of the times it's like kind of jagged and asymmetrical in interesting ways. Is
Right.
that kind of a new stylistic thing, do you think, in the world, or are there people who've been doing that for a while that you kind of take influence from, maybe?
Yeah, I try not to take influence from other designers. I like to go outside of, I might go to art for inspiration, but it's definitely a trend. Like for me, because I started out doing it just for myself, was I have extreme OCD. It was really therapeutic for me to put these things together that went against the grain of what I would regularly make. Or I'm now okay with certain things, and it's finding a balance of kind of chaotic but one concise piece.
When you talk about being very picky with your clothing taste, before you started doing this, how would you describe kind of your day-to-day wardrobe?
Right. Typically, I don't go out a bunch, so I don't really counter to what a lot of people would probably think about my brand is I probably dress crazy all the time. But I mean, I work from home, and I only go out to go to thrift stores or a friend's house or something. I don't live in a big city. So mostly I dress for
Right.
comfort, but when I go out, I like to wear my clothes, express that. But my day-to-day stuff is I like military fashion a lot, so military surplus stuff,
Mm.
military shorts, and military boots. Kind of minimal look. I guess I get really in my head in public. I don't want someone to be able to be oh, this guy's probably like that. I don't want to fit any kind of stereotype, which is another reason I kind of
Mm.
started the brand. I like to not be able to put a finger on me until you talk to me and get to know me. And I think that's the same way a lot of the people that buy my clothes are. The more I talk to my customers, not be able to put a finger on me until you talk to me and get.
It's interesting you mentioned military boots and jackets and things, because
Right.
I don't know, something about that just strikes me as it's some of the most formal, maybe not formal, but it is kind of very formal in a way. And I feel like I don't, your stuff isn't necessarily informal, but it isn't uniform for, so you know what I mean? It's a
Yeah.
very different purpose. And so, do you use a lot of those military jackets, or I don't know what
Yeah.
the term is?
Recently, I've been using standard issue military liners for when people go across the country. So they'll have a military coat, and then they'll have a liner. It looks sort of like a North Face, like a green North Face.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I really like them. Yeah, it's fun to use.
I noticed one of the pieces on your Instagram, I think it was pants, and it had like camo, and then it also had this very like artificial looking like silver or like metallic texture combined with that. I thought that was a very interesting sort of mix between, you know, naturalistic colors and kind of a more techy look, I guess.
Yeah.
Is that like something, you know, recurring theme, you know, kind of contrasts with your work?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think juxtaposition is like really important. So like pulling
Mm.
from two polar opposite things and kind of putting them together. It's kind of reflected in like using military stuff for stuff that's so like informal.
Mm.
You're using something that's like I'm very nonconformist, so like ironic in a way to use army stuff because it's all not all about conformity, but there's a lot of that like shaving your head and doing
Right.
this and that and kind of losing a part of your identity so you can be a part of a group.
Yeah,
Interesting.
for sure. It makes me think back to like the early industrial wave in the 80s when you had all this like I don't know, people trying to think of some specific acts, but certain industrial acts in the early 80s had this real thing for like military style uniforms, despite the fact that it was very like noisy, abrasive, non-traditional music. In your work or in other people's work, just in general, it's interesting to see like military imagery being wildly reappropriated. It's kind of cool.
Right. Like one of the kind of ties is like my character Blunderhead. He's like a creature, like a reptile creature with like an army tank head. He's
Mm.
like I portray him as like mischievous and so he's kind of even though he's like a mascot, he's kind of like an antagonist, like in like my mind and the, kind of the story I'm telling. Like he kind of represents like the just like the flippant destruction of like how the military uses funding and it's not like scary when you see him, but he represents a kind of a scary sort of idea, I guess.
I have to say, like, when I look at the design of him, it recalls to my kind of like early 2000s Flash games, and I don't know if there were any kind of designs or stuff that influence you. I know that like Yu-Gi-Oh, you've posted like a few Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like unusual looking design seems like something you would see in a Yu-Gi-Oh card.
I definitely like get inspiration from other things, but I try to pull from enough different sources that it's kind of like a melting pot of ideas. So like it doesn't look, it's not like, oh, he took that from that. You can recognize it through like a bunch of different things, but it's not like, oh, it's like it's its own original thing.
When I saw him originally, there's this game I used to play back in the early 2000s, well, mid 2000s. I'm not that old. Uh, Called Adventure Quest.
Yeah, someone else told me that.
Really? Okay.
That's funny because I never played video games, but I like my older brother played all the time, and I would just like to go in GameStop and like look at like the game discs, like the covers. I would always like go look at just the cover. I had no idea what the game was about, but it was really captivating.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, like, I think any like video game that you're exposed to or just online game as a kid, I think definitely shapes your subconsciously shapes your design tastes. I think.
Right, right. I think that's like
Mm.
why Pokemon now is like so like it's big in fashion and like in rap culture. It's like all coming back, I guess, as nostalgia, and also with like Pokemon
Mm.
Go coming back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that does kind of make sense.
Like I know it in some like genres of music and rap. I was actually talking about this on a podcast we did with 990X and Evil Boy, who's talking about funk, and basically the whole concept of that music was using like video game samples in it. So yeah, I mean there's definitely that kind of you definitely see those kind of tropes reappearing these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I didn't know that about funk.
Yeah, what's spelled it's Phonk.
Oh, funk. Okay, that's cool. I'll look that up.
Can I ask, like, kind of in general, like, how old you are? Because I was born in, like, 96.
Yeah, I'm 97, so I'm 21.
Okay,
I'll
yeah,
be
so.
I'll be 22 like Sunday, I think. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so, I mean, like, you are you're like OG Zoomer.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, sometimes I'm considered that, depending on, what scheme you go by. But I think, in my opinion, like, I feel people born in like the mid, or I should say like mid to late 90s, relate culturally more to those born after than before.
That is interesting. Wow.
Especially like the media and just like video games and entertainment. I don't know, I don't have as much like nostalgia for retro video games as I feel like people maybe a few years older than me would.
Yeah, I could see that. Like retro, they're like retro now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, going back to like the military, the kind, the military imagery and the military uniform usage, do you feel that that aspect of your work is in some way sort of a political statement, or is it just mainly aesthetic for you, or is it a little bit of both, maybe?
It is a political statement, I think, but not in the way that I'm in favor of the military, but more I guess I have a
Yeah,
dark
like
sense
a
of humor. Like I do it like out of irony. It's like, "Oh yeah, you like the military? Like that's cool. It's so cool." But like but like people that have that same mindset can see it and they get it immediately like, "Oh yeah."
I feel like that's a large reason why, like, apart from, I guess, extreme sports, because you definitely see camo fashion in, like, extreme sports subculture.
Right.
And I got a little bit, I guess, like the hunting or extreme sports aesthetic from your page as well.
Yeah, so like I like because I thrift everything. Like everything I do is like thrifted except for vinyl bags where I gotta go and buy the vinyl from like a fabric store. Everything's thrifted, and so like with camo sticks out a lot because it fills a lot of empty space and kind of makes noise. I like that a lot, but it's also you never see camo in contrast, or you never see camo in contrast with like something really colorful because that's like so counterintuitive
That's
to
true.
like what it's supposed to be. Like putting a sleeve of a camo jacket like on a tie-dye shirt or a tie-dye
Yeah.
hoodie. So it's stripping away the purpose. It's like now it's just the aesthetics.
Yeah, that's a very interesting juxtaposition too between like the hippie connotation of tie dye and the military camo.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Are there like other artists on Instagram that you've collaborated with? I know there was one. Um, am I saying this right? Xeroxo that you collaborated with.
Yeah, that's how I say her name. I think that's how you say it. So our collab has been like it's still kind of going on. I don't really know what's going on her end. Not to talk badly, she
Right,
might just
sure.
be busy. But so yeah, I sent like five pieces over. I think it was mostly like the theme was like black and white, contrasting pieces, and the black side was like the stuff that I did mine on, which is kind of interesting because I guess my stuff is definitely a lot darker than hers. Is really like nostalgic video games, very colorful airbrush.
Like anime and stuff like that.
Yeah. But I think that was a really good collab because I think in both ways, like you kind of like creatively get not in a rut because that's like a negative connotation, but like you start to find like your voice, and then once you have that voice, like certain ideas or concepts are kind of like out of your grasp a little bit, and so
Uh,
like I love her like style, and I think she really likes my style, so it was really cool that we could voice that side of our brand, our creative side, by collaborating in that way.
Now, so who found who first?
So like right when I started Xalamander, she was like maybe the first or second person I followed. I didn't know who she was before, but like I guess when you start an account, it gives you like a recommended,
Uh,
and I saw hers, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. And so I DM'd her like almost immediately. Like she had maybe 2,000 followers when I started,
Oh,
and I was at like maybe 100. And I DM'd her and I was like saying I like her work and like we should collab when I'm bigger. She's like, we can collab now. And so like this has been a long time in the works, just finding like the right time to do stuff. So yeah, that was a really cool collab.
yeah, because like I feel looking at her page, she uses a lot of like this airbrushed, or not I guess airbrushed, but kind of like graffiti look over
Yeah.
like ostensibly generic clothes, and you kind of have like this style of taking thrifted clothes that are kind of maybe not disposable, but just kind of cast aside and reclaiming them in this
Right.
very artistic manner.
Yeah, I really like her stuff and how she uses just like mostly whites and like you were saying like just kind of I think I work better with like shapes and she works better with
Like a blank
like 2D.
canvas.
Right. So if like clothing was art, which it kind of is, but I would be like a sculptor and she'd be like a painter. So it's like a cool combination of the two.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. I think it's interesting what you're doing, and like just in terms of anybody, and we both me and Noah have seen everybody on Instagram is pushing their merch line, and like 90% of the time they're like some offshore Alibaba ordered shirts, but like you guys are doing something. You're not really doing a fashion line, but you are creating, your own wearable art, and it's much more, I feel, um, direct. You get to make the garments yourself. You're not dependent on the quality from some other, offshore source or something.
Yeah, I just feel like it has two things like I really never want to get away from that is because like one, I believe sustainable clothing is like really important. I don't like wasting anything or I've gone so many times just to look at manufacturing clothes, but like I just keep stopping myself because it would like take away the soul of it, and my hands didn't touch every piece. I remember like in an interview, Ass Pizza said that. Like I look up to him a lot. If you're familiar with him.
Yeah, I remember. I think I saw an interview with him where he talked a little bit about the clothing he makes.
Yeah, I think he's just really cool, salt of the earth kind of guy. I try to not take like inspiration from his actual creativity part, which is hard to do because he's so prevalent. But just as far as his like mind state of making these pieces, so he gets out like he segued it to graffiti once, is because like there's no reason you would do that, no rational reason to do graffiti except for that you got to get your stuff out there, and the risk is kind of cast aside because you got to get your work out there, your name out there. I really resonate with that. I think that's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I've noticed there's a lot of these kind of similar artists, not in the sense that you guys all do the same things, because you're all doing very different stuff, but you all kind
Right.
of take to the similar kind of rough around the edges, but very much endearing in its own right because of its rawness. It doesn't feel like it was thought up in some kind of corporate boardroom. It feels just very fresh and grassroots.
Yeah, for sure. And like I've seen now, it's really sad, but like Forever 21 is now coming out with stuff that looks in the kind of style like cutting shirts apart and putting them together, and it's just kind of cringy because they're trying to take away like or like recreate something that's so not authentically
And like those clothes probably aren't even reclaimed anyway, so like what's the purpose?
right. Like they're literally like manufacturing two shirts and then cutting them apart and like mix and matching. It's like it's counterintuitive.
Like you would think that they would want to take like old shirts or stuff that people haven't bought or whatever and like do it that way because it would look more authentic too,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, it is a lot harder to if you're like mass producing that. There's like because I've tried to recreate pieces and like there's no way to find those two shirts again. You know, it's one of one by choice, but it's also one of one because it's really damn hard to recreate. But yeah, with the whole thing about like big brands doing that is kind of first it was like, oh man, we're gonna be out of here soon because, but then I started like they're only limited to mass production type of like technologies and stuff. And so I've gone like in the opposite direction and like just doing things it would be so impractical for a factory to do. So then I kind of like have my own kind of ground that's not going to be, it's like my own little territory, I guess. So like I'll go out of my way to really think about like what can a factory do and what can't they do. So like I haven't released anything yet like this, but I have some pieces that have like backpacks, like parts of backpacks on them, shoes. Like I think the camo pants you were talking about with the silver on them, they were also made of Asics like running shoes. So I think that's like a fun way to incorporate a whole different side of fashion because you don't well one you don't like associate typically like running shoes with fashion, but then you put it in a way that you can like sort of recognize it, but it's like, oh, he did this with it. Now it's kind of something else.
Yeah, I mean, like the textures you work with, there's like, I don't see any way that you can fake that, like on a mass produced level.
Yeah, yeah,
On your page, I don't know if these are more recent or if I've only seen the more recent ones, but you have a couple of these, like, they're not exactly clothing, they're these little plush. The one that I saw was the Spike one, the little Spike ball.
yeah.
I like that. I like him.
Thanks.
He's cool.
Uh, I think yeah, like I saw that a couple people were just like really stuck in clothes. Like because I came from sculpture before I started Xalamander, and so like
Hmm.
I really want to think of this as like really you can't put it under like an umbrella. Like it's going to be art. It's going to be wall canvases. I'm going to do paintings, and so now I'm kind of like building the infrastructure for like this universe I want to make with like characters. And so like those plushes are sort of testing the waters of like of having characters, having names, and eventually they'll be like in the art and the prints and stuff like that.
Could we see a
Thanks.
Blunderhead plushie?
Yeah, I think it'd be a little tough because he's so like a polygon. He's got lots of
Hey.
squares, but I think that could definitely happen.
And if they can make, Thomas the Train plushies, who
Yeah,
is not, not
it's
exactly
very
a round
similar.
object.
Yeah, that's crazy that your mind works like that's how my mind works too. Like that's pretty much like the exact same like structures and stuff that Blunderhead has.
I mean, it's very inorganic, That's particularly
Right.
a challenge, but I think, I have to ask what like medium did you sculpt in?
So I did. It was actually very similar to my roots of using reclaimed clothes. So I used reclaimed metal and welded them together and made like. So I would take like horseshoes and they'd be like the ribs of a T-Rex, and it would have. So I'd start off like every metal piece would be a bone of the animal or person that I'm making. And then I'd make a metal piece for like the muscles and then a metal piece for the eyes and everything. And so it was like an anatomically correct creature made out of like car parts
Nice.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
I think this is the thing that's so fascinating about Instagram and similar services is here, you're doing your thing, and I feel like before the internet and before all this, you would probably just be out doing your thing and probably relatively content. But now with
Yeah.
Instagram, you have such a platform to gain new followers and new collaborations. It's really, it's really empowering to a lot of people who otherwise may just be kind of like, local oddities or not really understood in their community, or even if they are, they might not get a lot of press about it. And I feel like, you have a world where I reach because of the internet.
Yeah, it's really an amazing thing. And like when I hear people like on podcasts and stuff like talking about like how bad social media is, they're saying like because you compare yourself to someone else and like their life looks better because they're putting a mask on. That that sparks the emotion of sadness or feeling incomplete or something. But that same exact tool can make you like push yourself. It's like they're doing that, like I should be doing
Yeah.
this. I could be doing this better. So like, it's a double-edged sword. And I think thankfully since I'm in this, I don't even know what you call it, like reclaimed clothing or deconstructivism clothing
Yeah.
fashion, but like nothing's like unattainable like in this because everything could be like thrifted or like there's no real limitations.
Yeah.
When did you start to learn to, sew and do all that? Was it something that you kind of learned recently, or was it a skill that you had, but then just kind of it flowed naturally into your work?
Yeah, so there was kind of like a natural ending sort of towards January, February. So I was like making those sculptures and I loved making them. I was going to art shows and I'd sell like a couple pieces, but like for prices I wanted. And so I was like renting out a space to like weld in. I just kind of like lost my passion in it. And my clients, I just didn't connect with them. And I feel like if you're selling art, that's a really important thing. Is like it was just like older people that didn't get me and didn't really care to understand me. It was just like this art's crazy. And so eventually, like it was kind of a blessing that like I couldn't pay rent in that spot anymore, and so like forced me to make a decision. It's like, well, I got to move out and then do something else with art because like not I'm really set on not doing a 9 to 5. And so I think there was maybe a month or two where they overlapped where I was doing both. So like I started sewing. My first piece was for Christmas, so there was maybe 2 months of overlap. So my brother's wife, like she's an artist. She does like really traditional stuff like watercolors and paints houses and portraits. And so I had the idea, like I didn't know how to sew, but I had the idea to like get a sweater and then cut out like a big piece of white cotton from a pair of shorts and
Uh,
put it on the back. And so she could like paint watercolors on the so it was like a canvas on a sweater. Yeah, so like I really need to revisit that because that was before Xalamander. That was just like me making something as a gift. So yeah, that was the first piece.
was the pressure when you started to get big, how did that affect you? Do you feel now maybe you're a little more hesitant to post stuff online, whereas in the beginning, you just posted whatever, or are you pretty much kind of the same?
My mind works really abstractly, and like I'm working on like being more structural and like having points. And so like I'm now getting at a point where like I have like a bar. Like if a piece doesn't meet that, like I won't post it. That's like a brand new thing. Before I would post everything. Now that I'm like finding my style, I think there's like criteria that my stuff has to meet for me to post it. And it just feels better. It feels like I'm gaining structure and I think I could still like have the look of a crazy clothing brand, but like in my head know what I will and won't do and like what is like exclusively Xalamander and not
Uh,
literally trademark it, but just like having, trademarks that if Young Thug or something wears my stuff on stage, it's not like, okay, who was it? Who did it? It's like
right.
you can recognize, oh, that Xalamander dressed him. That's crazy.
Yeah, and if
Hmm.
Virgil Abloh tries to rip you off, there will be no mistakes who it came from.
There's a I have a plot to collab with him, so hopefully that'll pan out.
Hopefully, he
That would
doesn't
be
rip you
cool.
off.
I hope not. I feel like he's original enough that he wouldn't. I don't know. I have seen like a couple things he's put out that looks eerily similar to smaller designers,
Yeah,
but
I saw a post on Writer Rip's Instagram recently, and some of the posts there that he compared his art to Virgil's look. I mean, it was pretty damning in my mind.
really, I've seen stuff, but like I almost like empathize with him. Like he's creative directing for Louis Vuitton, and he was just kind of like put in that seat. Just I mean, more or less because he knew Kanye, and it's like he's now like in charge of these two huge, like probably the biggest brands, and it's like he's got to get inspiration somewhere.
I feel like that would be a weird position. I mean, aside, I don't know, like because people think that like an artist is just like you get to do whatever you want. But I mean, when you land like a job, it's kind of hack work, because unless you're really on your own time, you're expected to have this and this out. You're expected to meet this demand. What's in season this year, or what's the style in this particular art. That is very. I will say it's very stressful, but I think still, like, I don't think it's an excuse to steal from, or let's put it this way, take inspiration from others without their knowledge.
They're like consent or kind of doing it. Yeah. Like I think about that. Like probably more than I think about actually making clothes is like inspiration. And like I really want to like write a book or make a podcast or like just speak on the idea of how to get inspiration without, because I think there's a right way to do it and an efficient way to do it, that you're getting inspiration and it's original, like it's truly like original.
I mean, cause like when I make music sometimes, I'll hum a tune in my head, and then I'll realize, oh, it was that song, or it was this famous riff or whatever. But that subconscious thing that happens where you're designing something, and then like a week later you're like, oh shit, somebody already did that.
I think there's several ways that happens. Sometimes like you're saying, it's subconscious because you saw something else and it kind of resonated. Or I think it's much more of the time it's that, rather than someone like being malevolent, like, haha, I'm gonna take this small guy's stuff. Yeah, I've had like lots of run-ins with brands, like especially this last 2 or 3 weeks, where I supposedly stole something, or it looks like someone stole something from me. Always talk it out. And now I'm at a point where if I get confronted, like I'm just going to FaceTime them, because it's hard to tell people's intentions or anything just through text.
I feel that, yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to speak on this because I feel like we're cool now. So I had that piece that had the big horns out of the side.
Uh-huh.
So that, like, I posted that and it did like really well. It's like almost at 1,000 likes now.
Oh yeah.
So it got featured on this outerwear archives page. So like one of the bigger guys like in this industry saw it. His name's Dopamine Online. He makes lots of pants. So he used to make masks, and so I knew that, but I never really thought twice about it. And so his masks apparently had horns on them back in the day. It was like a year or two ago. And so he DM'd me really upset about me using horns.
It was
so
just like
frustrating,
so frustrating
that
that
I couldn't tell if he was upset that I used horns or that he thought I ripped off his idea. And so like we talked it out, and it turns out he really likes my stuff, and now he follows me.
Nice.
But yeah.
Yeah, because when I saw your post with the horns and the sweater, I mean, I don't know how that would look actually worn, but it certainly looked quite cool on Instagram, I thought. Like,
yeah, it does look really cool. Like in person, like on,
yeah,
it looks really cool. I never wore it out on. Like I wore it out with the hood down, and
nice.
so like the horns are just kind of hanging in the back off the hood.
Yeah, I feel like regardless if the hoodie's on or not, just the jacket itself makes for an interesting silhouette.
Yeah, and that was like the reason why, like, I really came at him hard. Like I FaceTimed it, Dopamine immediately, like cussed him out. I was like, this is my idea. Because okay, so the horns weren't even supposed to be horns. It was like my first attempt to try to make Xalamander, like the character with like the shovel kind of head. It was like my attempt to make that a hood. And so like they weren't even initially supposed to be horns. So yeah, that kind of upset me, and we talked it out. Yeah, we're good now.
That's sufficiently different enough. I mean, like,
yeah, but I could definitely see, because like even the composition of like the horns and where they sit,
sure,
like on the head, is very similar to how I did mine. But yeah, so I could see that. Like I could put myself in his shoes and be like, that looks, yeah.
I saw this Xalamander shirt you had on Depop, and I thought of kind of like that grungy period in like the late 90s, where like you would see these very interesting design motifs meant to kind of, think of like a, yeah, kind of like a dark, gritty environment, usually like kind of industrial or like, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Like, yeah, my stuff's definitely changed a good bit. Like since then, I don't know if I posted it later, but that was like one of the first pieces I did. Yeah, definitely really grungy with the or like earthy tones.
Yeah.
Um,
Like if it was like animated, you expect like the text to be flashing around a bunch and like some edgy kind of like Trent Reznor style electronica in the background or something.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Which is kind of a good segue into like what are your like music influences, and like how do you think that comes into some of your work?
I listen to a lot of like indie rock, maybe like early 2010s indie rock. I mean, it sounds cliche, but like I listen to like everything. So like current rap. I really liked XXX Tentacion. Or I don't know how exactly you say it, but I really liked him a lot. I've probably listened to him for like 2 years straight. Lil Peep, definitely that like angsty kind of hip hop vibe that like got introduced a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Emo hip hop.
Yeah, I would say like the message of Xalamander is very similar to both X and Peep's kind of message and vibes of being in a hard place but trying to help other people out of it. There's definitely songs that are super harsh by both of them, but then there's also like really like loving and like understanding pieces that they made. Um, and so yeah, I'm trying to lean. Yeah, I definitely like see the parallel between because I listen to Lil Peep all the time, probably more than I should, honestly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I just see kind of parallels between those two.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned XXX Tentacion because when I think of him, a lot of what I think of is many of the famous photos of him where he, like the one where it's a profile of him and he's looking down. I
Yeah,
think
I
it's a
love that
black and
photo.
white photo, and the dreads are
Yeah,
almost looking like horns.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and I guess in that way, there's just kind of I saw a bit of a connection. There's just like creating this sort of a character. Um, I don't know. That wasn't really a question, but I
no, no,
thought that was
I
very
like that.
interesting.
Now I got to make a piece that looks like his hair in that picture. So
That
thanks
would
for
be
that.
good.
Yeah, I really like that picture a lot.
Me too.
Yeah, the artist Futura 2000. I would definitely recommend you check his stuff out because even though it's different than yours, he does work like with a lot of these like characters, edgy looking graffiti style elements in some of his pieces. Yeah, I guess he's had like a collab with Nike and like North
North
Face.
Face.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, he has this one character, and it reminded me kind of like the Blunderhead character that I think his character's called Nosferatu. Yeah.
Huh.
And it's got this very kind of edgy look. And the cool thing is like the design, the silhouette is so recognizable that he can put like whatever kind of textures or shape to it, and you still like instantly recognize the design of it.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing a sculpture of that in the Dior show for Fashion Week in Paris. Yeah, it was like probably like 3 feet tall.
Yeah, that's
Let me look.
that's impressive.
Wait, it was either Dior or Off White. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think he said he worked with Virgil.
Okay, so it was Off White.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see that design because like your stuff, it kind of you have this interesting contrast, kind of dirty grungy and unrefined, graffiti look overlaid with this futuristic style, which I feel like wasn't very prevalent. I mean, obviously, those aesthetics were strong in the 2000s, but you rarely saw them mingle in that kind of way.
Yeah, yeah.
So at this time, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break, and then
Okay,
we're going to pick it up with you and finish the interview off.
awesome. Sounds good.
All right, see you in a bit.
Cool. Peace.
So, welcome back to the World Movers Podcast. I'm here with our guest, Xalamander, and my co-host, 51st Citizen. When we last left off, we were kind of talking about different influences, and during the break, I was talking about, different kind of interesting patterns, and Xalamander mentioned your dad was originally from Guatemala and found some very interesting patterns when he's gone to there and traveled. Would you like to kind of, explain that and kind of like, various foreign textiles and your interest in that?
Yeah, like I haven't even really thought about it as far as like incorporating it to Salamander. But yeah, my dad was born there and I've gone there a couple times. And there's like lots of Mayan subcultures there that are still like very like they still speak their native tongue, like not Spanish. I remember there's one language called Momo, and it sounded like the weirdest thing I ever heard. But all these subcultures have their own patterns that they weave, and like it's in their clothes and pillows and stuff like that. Really unique thing to see. I never learned which patterns were what, but they're all very different. I remember like a couple years ago, Vans, they made a shoe, and it was inspired by Guatemalan textiles, and I remember there being like some kind of uproar about it because they merged these two different. They kind of just made their own pattern and said it was like from Guatemala, but it was just like a like a hybrid.
One consistent design I see what you do and other artists do is this tendency towards living forms that appear to be like some kind of creature. Like when you had obviously the horns on the jacket, you also had the T-Rex backpack. Are you aware of any other artists who do something similar to this that maybe inspired you in the beginning?
Yeah, like I'm glad you brought that up about like I just want to say this before I answer that question. I think it's kind of crazy that this is becoming a thing because basically like when you dress, you're almost like playing a part. You're dressing like how you want to be perceived by anyone that sees you wearing that. Sort of like you're, dressing up. So it's sort of merging Halloween with like fashion with every day. Yeah, so I think it's a fun thing. The thing that really inspired me to sort of like make it, it's going to sound like a weird inspiration, but I really liked the old book Where the Wild Things Are.
Yeah.
The big monsters. I think it's a really cool thing, like, because they all had like horns and they were all kind of crazy, and a lot of them were like furry or like hairy. And I'm gonna be doing like a lot more stuff with different horns and kind of like today I made a piece with giant spikes on the shoulders. It's just like a fun way. It's really uh, like out there. It's like very unnecessary, so it's novel. Has its own kind of personality. Like I'm looking at one of the pieces I made today, and it's got horns on it. It's on a coat hanger, and it still kind of has its own personality to it.
I guess just mentioning the intersection between dressing and wearing clothes and playing a sort of a character in a way. Because a lot of the time when I see a particular item of clothing or something that looks like it, the immediate connections that I draw in my mind are I think of the people that I see wearing it the most often. And in that way, it sort of takes on the form of that thing, which I guess isn't that much of a revelation because, people associate certain types of dress with certain types of people, but even on an individual level,
Right.
like a certain type of shoe, one person always wears. And so when I see that, I think of all the traits they
Crazy,
have.
like how much people and humanity gravitates towards trying to put people in a box, which like it's efficient and it's a lot of the time like that's why stereotypes are a thing because there's some truth to it, and it's almost sometimes safe to assume that
Yeah,
someone that dresses a certain way, might be that way.
we would rather be right about a certain type of person with a certain type of dress, like 65% of the time or whatever, than allow for any sort of uncertainty. That scares us a lot.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that.
What?
Yeah, but now like fashion's so counterintuitive. Like with the dad shoes coming back, straight jeans coming back,
Yeah, yeah.
or like boot cuts. Like there used to, or at least in my mind, like in high school, there used to be just. I mean, I grew up in Hoover, Alabama, so it's lots of Southern brands like Southern Marsh and all that, like Vineyard Vines. Like there was just like a certain look that was cool, but like now, like you could be in like any subculture, and I just think a lot more subcultures have a voice now where they're accepted.
Yeah. I mean, there's less rigidity in this. Like, you may be wearing this certain style of, let's say, tech wear or something that in the past you would have been clowned on, but now, like, there's, resurgent subculture. On the topic of clothing, there is this brand I came across on eBay quite a while ago, and their name is called Gooch, which unfortunately has a unfortunate connotation on Urban Dictionary these days. But it actually well predates the internet. Came out. The guy started making clothes in like the 80s. Gooch was one of these brands that made these very expressive and kind of loud silk and rayon shirts.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
And he even had like this little character that he had printed on each of the garments. Even though these were mass produced, they maintained this sort of handmade or very expressive style that you don't see too often in newer fashion brands.
Yeah, for sure.
I was on eBay and I came across a listing for Gooch clothing, and it said new with tag. I'm like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be vintage clothing. So I checked the seller's page, and turns out the seller is actually the great grandson or the grandson of the founder of the clothing brand. Yeah, so I reached out to him and found out some really interesting stuff about kind of how the brand started. One of these days, we're probably, I don't know, going to find some way to make like a little mini, I don't know, I say documentary, but something showcasing a lost brand because it's really interesting.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. I like it.
When you go to various like thrift stores and stuff, is there a particular decade? Of course, we mentioned about camo, but like, is there a particular decade of clothing that it kind of resonates with you?
Like right now, like I look for a lot of like band tees, like basically like a movie poster turned into a t-shirt. I like that kind of stuff a lot.
Yeah.
But as far as like eras, like I really like 80s, like 60s, 70s, maybe early 80s t-shirts. I feel like they just put a lot more work into their art. They're almost always like full color prints, and even though they're super old, they holding together, and they have that aged look. Yeah, I've been looking for those a lot more, but it's definitely hard to find. I really try to look for Grateful Dead stuff because I really loved them in high school. Their art, like their t-shirts are like unrivaled. Like their
Yeah,
art is just
absolutely.
insane.
How often do you get people that like just send you stuff?
It's maybe happened like 4 or 5 times. And sometimes they'll just like send me stuff and they don't want anything in return. It's just like just send me like jeans and shirts and patches, and they're like, I was gonna start clothes, but you're better or something like that, or they never got into it.
Hey.
So that's really cool.
You also had this design that was it was made out of military sleeping bag, and supposed to be, I guess, a giant salamander, a Xalamander.
Yeah.
I find that really interesting, like mixing like a very utilitarian object into like a plush. Like, could you kind of explain like your thought process when you created this?
Yeah. Definitely, like we've talked about it a good bit. Juxtaposition is just like really important to me and fun, and I like to incorporate it as much as possible. So yeah, just using something so militant and for one purpose, and then using it for just something that's completely unnecessary just for fun, like a pillow or a plush. It's juxtaposition is how I'd sum it up.
Uh-huh. Would you ever like to create something like a plush that also has like kind of like a practical, like, you know, say like a sleeping bag, but is also like a plush at the same time, and like a usable sense?
Possibly, yeah. I think as long as I'm doing everything by hand, like I want the handmade stuff to kind of be, I guess, anti-utilitarian. I mean, you can use it as clothes, obviously, because it's clothes. But I think if I could find, like, eventually I want to find a manufacturer that uses recycled materials, and I want to put out stuff that wouldn't be one of one. So, like, an idea like you just had, that, like a military sleep, or like a sleeping bag plush, that could be something that I do.
Some of your, like this one image you have, you've got like this dude, and then he's got like a giant head. Like, what was the thought behind that? Was just like a caricature style thing, or just like to attract attention, or?
It's the guy like with the backpack.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a series of photos I put like after like a scroll bar in one of them. But like I haven't talked about this, but your kind of inner child is really important to me. And so kind of like making like his proportions more childlike, because like it, I mean, you can like my clothes, but like to buy a T-Rex skull bag, you kind of have to assume that this guy, like it appealed to a childlike sense of nostalgia. Is like I remembered loving dinosaurs, and that was probably the selling factor of that bag, and probably a lot of my stuff.
I mean, like, are you familiar with the page Soul Dog? Yeah, they make
Yeah, that's cool.
yeah, they make kind of this, very early 2000s, late 90s Y2K looking stuff that I feel, again, seems like something you would have worn as a kid or something in elementary school, but these are like pieces for, adults. I think there seems to be this general mood that I think kind of started, or you first saw it start with like a Drain Gang and like the kind of design motifs that came from that movement. And then progressively, I've been seeing more and more of these kind of designers on Instagram.
Yeah, I really like I'm looking through it right now. This is awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely very Y2K. Yeah, it's really good stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to get like more into screen printing. I think it'd be a good avenue to do more like with the characters.
Huh?
Hmm.
Yeah, definitely want to do that.
We mentioned an Adventure Quest, and of course Yu-Gi-Oh. Was there other TV shows you watched or cartoons you watched as a kid that you feel really shape your design sensibilities?
Definitely Digimon, probably a lot more so than Yu-Gi-Oh. Because it was like their art style was like this happy medium between how soft Pokemon was and then how just like harsh Yu-Gi-Oh characters kind of looked.
Hmm.
But yeah, Digimon was like, I just really like that, and I still have like Digimon books of like all the characters, and I really like the cartoon. And yeah, I've always kind of like gravitated towards that style.
I feel like that T-Rex backpack definitely reminds me of the one character from Digimon, now that you say that.
For sure. Yeah, that was kind of unintentional. It was just me trying to like
Yeah.
put as much detail into the skull as I could, but make it a backpack also.
I remember watching Digimon a lot as a kid, and it's tough for me to remember details of it. But I
Yeah.
do remember that, yeah, I was very, very drawn to that art style, the style of the characters and everything. I don't know. I mean, like you said, you have this like hyper, almost spiky, that kind of stuff that you associate with Yu-Gi-Oh and a few other like of that style of. What do you call that genre, by the way?
Um,
Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh,
I really
Digimon.
I really don't know. I've wondered that question before. Like, I mean, it's like anime, but it's like uh, they're very like similar,
Yeah.
especially like Digimon and Pokemon, because like
Yeah, and it
because
has like this.
Yu-Gi-Oh is more like the cards, but like Pokemon and they were like with the creatures. They were like companions.
Yeah.
A little off topic, but there's a really really good film that Takashi Murakami made, and it's very similar to like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's like a live action film. And it's so good. It's like
What's the name of it?
it's called Jellyfish Eyes.
That sounds interesting.
I mean, I'm a little biased to like when I watched it just because I love Takashi Murakami. When I found out he made a movie, I was like, I mean, I already knew I liked it before I watched it. But yeah, it's basically Digimon. Like they have these little, they're kind of like cell phones, but they store the monsters in them, and they fight the monsters against each other.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up Takashi Murakami because we were actually the last podcast I did with Lilikoi. He was talking about Takashi Murakami. He actually lives in Japan, and it's kind of interesting that you also share that influence because Lilikoi's work is very, very different. Your stuff, but stuff's very colorful.
Yeah, for sure. I've always loved Japan, and I just think Tokyo specifically is really influential in just how expressive they are. I eventually want to do like vinyl toys, like Japanese sofubu, with my characters. I think it's just like a really cool, expressive, fun medium.
I think what's particularly interesting is how we have various artists on our podcast, and oftentimes they will be influenced by the same artists. Like you mentioned, Takashi Murakami, and of course, Lilikoi.wave mentioned them as well. And yet, your styles are totally different.
Yeah, for sure. And I see that a lot. Like I remember, like Lil Peep always talked about how much he was influenced by Blink 182, and like you can definitely kind of hear that in a lot of his music. But at the same time, it's so like uniquely him. Like he had his own trademark. And it's also another thing is like you can have like influencers from like a decade ago or decades ago, but like with like now's technology and now's influences, like it's like almost it's just like bound to happen that it's going to be like a new different thing. That's cool.
But getting back to like that whole monster collection genre, thanks to Casey in the chat for identifying the name of the genre for us, like like Digimon and Pokemon. It's kind of interesting.
What did you say it was called?
Monster collection.
Oh, okay. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But it is very interesting because it seems to me to be another connection to the whole design and character thing because, a lot of that those shows in general was like, these creatures that maybe they didn't have their own full-fledged personalities, but I guess in a lot of ways, they did.
Yeah.
They had the characters don't talk. The Pokemon don't talk. It's strictly the way they act and mainly their design that is responsible for giving them their sort of personality.
Yeah, like speaks for them, basically.
Mm-hmm. I forget if the Digimon talked in Digimon.
Yeah, they do. They do talk.
Mm-hmm.
And like most people, like because I've told you, but like most people would like kind of associate Xalamander with Blunderhead, which is a natural thing to do. But like, I guess in the grand picture, I eventually want to paint is like he's kind of an antagonist. Like he's not even I wouldn't even say he like embodies Xalamander. He's just kind of a figurehead.
I I feel like in general, art is very therapeutic, and I guess it's fair to say that it's kind of like the embodiment of your own kind of internal antagonist.
Yeah, yeah, I could say that. It's also like when I first drew Blunderhead, I was like in a very angsty kind of mode because I think it was about the time that my sculptures were just kind of, or my sales were just kind of going downhill, and I was starting to realize this might not work out. So yeah, it kind of embodies that. So it's like a cool thing that that character was like sort of birthed out of frustration, and now is sort of I don't know. I don't want to say I'm getting rid of Blunderhead, but I think the character Xalamander, like it's inspired by an old, like an ancient. It's not a dinosaur, but it was in that era. It was called a Diplocalus. It was like a salamander that was like 5 feet long and had that type of head. So like the Xalamander character I made is basically that, a little skinnier and like cuter and has 6 legs. Yeah, so like I eventually want to do a lot more stuff with him and like make him the forefront of Xalamander, which would kind of make sense.
That is very cool, though, to me that just, precisely because you don't throw that character away, because I feel like a lot of people, when they have a certain, quote unquote phase
Yeah,
and feels really right to them at the time, but then afterwards they're like ashamed of it and they almost want to cover it up and push completely their new kind of persona. But I like that you've sort of, you were feeling that way at one point, but you didn't feel the need to cast it away. You've just kind of allowed it to be another personality in the whole Salamander universe, I guess.
yeah. So like I'm now working on I'm kind of building that universe out. So I've been like really inspired by like 70s sci-fi art and like
Mm.
novel covers. And that art to me was just like probably one of the best eras of art because it was utilitarian, like it was going on covers. So it wasn't starving artists. It was almost corporate artists, but they were extremely talented and like making these things inspired by that style, but it's going to be sort of my universe with my characters, and it'll kind of be like storytelling, but there'll never be an actual story. You can just
Mm.
kind of put things together and your mind fills it in.
Do you know the artist H.R. Giger?
Geiger, isn't it?
Um,
Geiger?
I I always assumed it was Geiger, but then I heard somebody say it Giger, and then I've said it
Yeah.
that way ever since because
Yeah.
I'm impressionable. But
this is the guy, the alien guy.
yeah,
Is that
yeah.
what, yeah, yeah, his stuff is out there.
I mean, obviously, it's like a very, very different style.
Hmm.
But when we talk about representing characters and that sort of thing, he's one of the first guys that comes to my mind, I think.
Yeah, it's very like skeletal. Like
Yeah, absolutely.
he like merges like all like anatomy and like insect anatomy.
You mentioned Xeroxo. Are there other artists on Instagram who've reached out to you to do like some kind of collaboration?
Yeah, like I think I mostly reach out just because like I'll find someone and like, super stoked on their work and just want to see our stuff together. A couple of brands have reached out to me. The only reason I've declined is just because right now I'm working on like 4 collaborations. One eventually will come out with By Siegs. If you follow him, he does like embroidery work.
Not familiar.
He's like in this space, but he's doing embroidery, so it has like this extra kind of touch of finishedness. But he's also yeah, he's very like expressive, and he has a character. And we're still trying to work out a way to get him and Blunderhead or Xalamander to interact.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I noticed just like right off the bat they they use like a lot of blank textures, Xeroxo, but well, they have a cleaner style. They have that embroidered look to them. Growing up, I actually had this hoodie that I wore for a long time as a kid. It was an embroidered pattern of like two dragons intersecting with each other, kind of like those, edgy flame T-shirts from the early 2000s. But it was
Yeah,
like also embroidered. It was really like I really loved that fact for some reason as a kid.
that sounds really cool. Yeah, like his like he originally like he's completely like rebranded, which I'm kind of sad. Like I really liked his old stuff. I like his new stuff, but I feel like his old stuff is a little edgier. He played a lot with because it was like when Supreme like really started blowing up. Like it's always been big, the box logos, and so like his character, like I think he still has stuff that's like it's like a box logo, but like it's busting out of that. Yeah, I think that's like really cool. Yeah, collaborations though. So I'm working on one right now with a guy named Wicked Violence. He's a very new brand out of New York, Brooklyn, and he does like direct to garment printing, like DTG printing. He has like 500 followers, I think. He's like brand new. Like I saw his stuff and I was like, oh, I gotta work with him. I've always wanted to like do DTG printing, and then on top of that, his stuff it's kind of mysterious. Like one of them, like a pill on a counter, and it's like a just like an iPhone photo, but it's printed on a shirt, and it says there's salt in the water. Which I have no idea if I haven't asked him if it has meaning, but I just really liked it. Yeah, so our collaboration's still in the works. Like the stuff's been printed and it's on the way here. It's gonna take a while because I'm gonna sew it all together and then send it back to him because he wants to model, like get model like real models and do like real photo shoots. So that'll eventually come out. And I'm working with like a week ago. I just started getting DMs from a bunch of verified people. I don't know what happened.
Oh.
So yeah, I'm making some clothes for Scar Lord.
Ooh, man.
Yeah, so that'll be it's a little challenging because he like only wears tech wear, and so I'm not even talking to him directly. So it's like really hard to kind of guess what he would wear.
Yeah. I mean, just because I'm not familiar with this guy, but just like looking at his designs, he definitely likes the camo. So, I mean, that's something to work with too, I guess.
So I have some camo. I found like a really cool piece today because I was looking for tech wear kind of stuff, and I found like a stocking, but it's like a very tactical stocking, like a Christmas stocking, but it's like black canvas and has like tons of pockets and like little loops and carabiners and stuff. I don't know how I'll use that, but so yeah, I'm making stuff for Scarlord and a couple other artists that like I haven't heard of, but they had the check mark, and I was like, well, that's probably good exposure. Check them out a little bit, but I can't remember their names off the top of my head.
Making moves, man.
That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah, it's like finally
It's really
kind
cool.
of gaining some traction.
I mean, because you only started in what, January?
I think February. Yeah.
That's pretty impressive, but I can see it like with your work. Obviously, you have prior experience as a sculptor, so when you went into making clothes, it wasn't like you were just going in completely blind with what you were doing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. It had some sort of like creative intuition starting out just from like working with other materials.
Are there any like classical artists from like the past that have influenced you? Various art movements of the mid-century and even earlier that influenced you or left an impact on you in some way?
Honestly, I wish I could sound super educated and say yeah, but not not really. Like not. I've always liked Leonardo da Vinci a lot. Just not so much his art, but like his. I guess it is his art, but like his drawings of inventions. Like
Yeah.
kind of like airplane drawing, and then the biomechanical man. He had a drawing of a robot, essentially, like way before its time. There's no telling if it would have worked or not, but he had like a general. He had a very like engineering based mind, which I can appreciate because I've always been making stuff.
What was the age where you first like kind of started making this, creative stuff on your own?
like really early. Like my mom would have told you. Like I used to always
Yeah.
draw on the walls with crayons and yeah, but like I started like making stuff. Probably like 13 or 14. Like I used to make these clay dragons out of like easy bake clay.
Same.
Really, that's awesome. And they were like had a like an electric type, like all the Pokemon types basically, but they were little dragons.
Do you have any pictures of those?
I don't. I completely forgot about them until you asked that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
I have them somewhere.
I mean, as basic as they are, like mine were super crude too, but like, I don't know if this is true for you when you went to school, but we used to get these like scholastic or like magazines. I remember there was this book series. It was something like Fire and Ice, and it centered around like these clay dragons that could like come alive, and so like that
Sounds
inspired me.
familiar.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they were like novels, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I know I didn't read all of them, but I read. Oh, I really like those books. Yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah. I was obsessed with like dragons and dinosaurs when
Yeah.
and yeah, you can still definitely, especially like my old sculptures. There are like lots of dinosaurs and like creatures.
Yeah, like in between moves, like most of the stuff that I made got destroyed or just fell apart.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like with Easy Bake, like it's just.
Yeah, I think I know where they are right now, but I'm pretty sure last time I saw them, they were broke.
Is there you mentioned of course artists who've DM'd you, but is there any artist right now, music or otherwise, that you would love the opportunity to work with?
Funny that you asked that. Yeah, this is like really cool, like a long time in the making. Because like when I made sculptures, I just really wanted to give them to musical artists that I liked, but I had no idea how to do that. And like no one in the industry was doing recycled metal art. Like they were mostly like boomers. I was probably the youngest person doing it, and so there's no networking there. And so I've always wanted to give something to Post Malone or like somehow do something with him. A guy's been DMing me, and I think he's a DJ, and he's going to like Rolling Loud next week, and so I'm doing his. I don't know if I'm doing his whole outfit or I'm doing like a top or something. Yeah, so that should be fun. Like he gave me his pant size and then shirt size and told me to pick which one, but I might do both. So I've been talking to him, and then at the end he was like, if you ever need connections, let me know. I was like, what? He's like, Post Malone, Young Thug. Bet. So hopefully he's not full of it.
Right? Like that's common, I was saying with Noah, now in the olden days, people used to, OD on drugs, but now people are ODing on clout.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
That's why like people will get like one DM like that from like a check mark and they post the DMs. I just think it's kind of corny. It's like if something comes out of it, then post that, but don't just post the interaction, I guess.
Well, I guess we've been talking pretty long, so I think we're gonna wrap it up. I
cool.
enjoyed this interview with you. I'm glad things finally came together and we were able to do this.
Well, thanks. I really appreciate it. It's a good conversation. Yeah, I'll be following y'all.
See ya sometime soon.
All right, see you, man.
All right, this has been DJ Angel Fire and 51st Citizen for the World Movers Podcast. We look forward to seeing y'all next week.